A game made by three broke college students accidentally invented an economy that now generates billions of dollars a year across the entire gaming industry. And Valve didn't even mean to do it. This is the entire story of Team Fortress, and to tell it properly, we have to go way back. It's 1996. The internet is a baby. Online gaming is basically just Quake, which, if you weren't there, was a first-person shooter where everyone ran around the same map, everyone had the same weapons, and the only strategy was aim at the person and click. Yeah, that's the whole game, and surprisingly, the people love it. However, three Australian university students, Robin Walker, John Cook, and Ian Cawley, had a different idea. They wanted a game where people played different roles, where one player had a machine gun, and another had a sniper rifle, and another had a flamethrower, and they all actually needed each other to win. A class-based team shooter. Today, that concept is everywhere. In 1996, it was revolutionary. So they built it themselves as a mod for Quake. All of this in their spare time while presumably not going to class. They put it on an FTP site, which for modern reference is basically a parking lot on the internet where you just dump files, with about as much ceremony as you'd put something on a USB stick. No trailer, no announcement, no marketing. They just uploaded it and hoped for the best. What happened next genuinely stunned them. Some people actually started downloading it, then more people, then a lot more people. It spread like crazy. So many people that the game was pulling more players into its own version of Capture the Flag than a mod that literally existed just to do Capture the Flag. Team Fortress was outpulling the CTF game at CTF. That's like opening a restaurant as a hobby and accidentally out-earning the Cheesecake Factory. Players formed clans. Clans had organized war matches. Some clans had 50+ members, web-based attendance tracking, and what they were calling war councils. This is the actual beginning of what we now call esports. This caught the attention of Valve, and what Valve did next would set off a chain of events that nobody, not even the three people at the center of it, saw coming. In early 1998, Valve, who were just about to release Half-Life and were the hottest studio in games, invited all three of them to Seattle. About 6 weeks into the visit, Gabe Newell offered to buy the rights to Team Fortress and give all three of them full-time jobs, a tempting offer. So Walker and Cook accepted and stayed. Only Cawley returned to Australia. Now, Valve had a problem, but it was a pretty good problem to have. The original mod had been so popular that a huge chunk of Half-Life's player base had bought the game specifically to wait for a proper Team Fortress sequel. So Valve needed to give those people something to hold them over. The answer was Team Fortress Classic, a port of the original mod rebuilt on Half-Life's engine, released in the spring of 1999. It was a stopgap. Thank you for your patience gift, and it was still genuinely loved. Meanwhile, in a different room, the real Team Fortress 2 was being built. That same year, at E3, the big annual gaming expo, where studios showed off their best work to the world, Valve showed their creation. They called it Team Fortress 2, Brotherhood of Arms. It was a serious, realistic military shooter, 12 classes with highly specific roles. There was even a commander class, which would let people watch the battlefield from a bird's eye view and issue orders to the whole team. It was so good, it won Best Online Game and Best Action Game at the show. People were super excited for the global release. Then, however, nothing happened. Here's where things get genuinely bizarre. That commander class that everyone was so excited about, Valve eventually had to cut it entirely. Not because the idea was bad, but because when they actually tested it, players just ignored the orders. A game built around a feature that everyone instinctively refuses to use doesn't work. So they scrapped Brotherhood of Arms and started over. The second version was a completely different game, a sci-fi shooter called Invasion: Humans vs. Aliens, with steampunk design and RTS mechanics layered on top. Funny enough, we only know it existed because files turned up during a massive hack in 2003 that also exposed Half-Life 2's source code, basically the worst day in Valve's history up to that point. Invasion had been quietly built and quietly killed without the public ever knowing. So they scrapped Invasion and started over once again. By 2004, Team Fortress 2 had become one of gaming's most famous pieces of vaporware. That's the word the industry uses when a game is publicly announced, then falls into a years-long void of silence, and nobody can tell if it's still being made or has been quietly cancelled. The game just sits there in a kind of limbo, and nothing is happening. It was being listed alongside Duke Nukem Forever, a game that famously took 14 years to ship, as an example of development gone completely off the rails. Journalists were writing headlines asking whatever happened to Team Fortress 2. Fans were asking on forums if Valve had just given up. The general consensus was that they were building it a third time, from scratch, in a completely different direction, but nobody knew that yet. Put yourself in the shoes of a Team Fortress fan in 2005. The mod you loved came out in 96. Team Fortress Classic dropped in 99. The sequel was announced in 98 with awards and everything, and it is now 2005. You have literally aged out of high school and into adulthood waiting for this game, and there is still nothing. Then, in 2006, out of almost nowhere, Valve dropped a trailer. Not for Brotherhood of Arms, not for that alien game, something completely different. This was what 9 years of rebuilding the same game over and over had produced. Not a realistic military shooter people expected, not a sci-fi RTS hybrid, a cartoon. A chaotic, gorgeous, entirely unique cartoon, and it looked amazing. But what it would go on to do to the entire games industry, nobody was ready for that either. October 18th, 2007. Valve released Team Fortress 2, bundled inside something called the Orange Box, alongside Half-Life 2, Portal, and a couple of expansions. For the price of one game, you got 5. It was one of the best deals in gaming history, and sitting inside that bundle was Team Fortress 2. Gabe Newell had written a message for the game. It said, "After 9 years in development, hopefully it will be worth the wait." It was. Critics gave it 9s and 10s across the board. The 9 classes, each played completely differently, and were all actually fun for different reasons. The game had personality and soul in a genre that usually had neither, but the first release was just the foundation. What Valve was about to do with it over the next few years was the real story. For a long stretch after launch, Valve treated Team Fortress 2 like a live experiment they were genuinely invested in. Every few months, a major update would drop. Each class update came with new weapons, new maps, new lore, and short animated films called the Meet the Team videos that showed off each character. The Medic video even got award nominations, and the Heavy Eating a Sandwich became a meme that spread far beyond anyone who had ever touched the game. Valve was making a free animated series as a vehicle for game updates, and it was working better than almost anything else in the industry at the time. Players made fan art, fan films, animations, all using a tool Valve released called Source Filmmaker. TF2 wasn't just a game anymore. It was slowly but surely becoming a culture. Then in September of 2010, Valve dropped the Manconomy update, and this is the part of the story that changed things well beyond Team Fortress 2. The Manconomy update added a store where you could buy cosmetic items, hats mostly, and not just buy them, you could craft them, trade them, find them in random drops, or pull them from mystery crates that cost a couple of dollars to open. You didn't know what was inside until the crate opened. Random reward crates with paid keys weren't necessarily new in the world. Some mobile games in Japan had been doing something similar for years, but Team Fortress 2 is the game that made the model mainstream in Western gaming. After TF2 proved it worked, it spread everywhere. FIFA introduced it. Overwatch built a huge part of its monetization around it. Call of Duty followed. Basically, every major live service game now runs on a version of what TF2's Manconomy put into practice. The in-game economy around TF2 started forming. Websites were built just to track the real dollar value of virtual hats. Rare cosmetics with special particle effects called unusuals were selling for hundreds of dollars. One guy even walked away with a check for tens of thousands of dollars in royalties. However, during this time, the game was still paid, but that changed in June of 2011 when TF2 went fully free to play. The player count multiplied overnight. According to Valve's own data, going free-to-play tripled revenue and quadrupled the active player count. This was Team Fortress 2 at its absolute peak, and then, slowly, Valve stopped. Not all at once. Updates kept coming for a few more years. Man vs. Machine, a mode where players fight off waves of robots, dropped in 2012. Competitive matchmaking finally got a proper overhaul in 2016. And then in October of 2017 came the Jungle Inferno update, new maps, new weapons, new cosmetics, a short film, the whole thing. A proper major update in the tradition of the golden years. But that was the last one. After Jungle Inferno, the TF2 team at Valve quietly dissolved. Robin Walker moved to work on Half-Life Alyx, Valve's big VR game. Other developers moved to Dota 2, to Steam itself, to various other things. You see, Valve doesn't have traditional management structures. Teams form around projects organically, and the project people were gravitating toward was no longer TF2. The game kept running on its own momentum, still pulling in massive numbers every day, but nobody was steering it anymore. And the reason for this is genuinely unknown. People say it was hard to update because of its code. Others say different things. It is strange, however, that they abandoned the game at its peak. Then in 2020, the man who had voiced the soldier since the game launched, a voice actor named Rick May, sadly passed away in April while the world was in the middle of the pandemic. The TF2 community held a memorial. A statue of the soldier was added to the game by Valve in his honor. It was a great loss to the community. But it also highlighted something that had been slowly dawning on the community for a while. The only updates coming out of Valve anymore were about loss, not new content. The game felt like it was winding down. And then the bots arrived, and everything got much worse. Late 2019, someone, or more likely several someones, started flooding TF2's official casual matchmaking servers with bot accounts. Basically, automated programs running an aimbot software that would join a server as sniper, lock onto every real player's head the instant they left spawn, and shoot them dead before they could take a step. 100% accuracy, zero human input, just a machine murdering everyone in the server over and over. People were getting fed up. In April of 2020, Valve's TF2 source code leaked even publicly. They were hacked again. The code was now out there for anyone to use, and bot operators used it to build more sophisticated programs than before. Programs that could not just aimbot but also spam slurs through text and voice chat, clone the usernames of real players to cause confusion when other players tried to kick them, and organize in groups to outvote any kick attempts. Some bot operators were charging money for a service that supposedly made your account immune from being targeted by their own bots. They had set up a protection racket inside a free cartoon game. Valve's response to this, for the better part of 2 years, was almost nothing. The one concrete action they took was a June 2020 update that stripped free accounts of both text and voice chat entirely. Free players couldn't type to teammates, couldn't call for a medic, couldn't say a word to anyone in the game until they spent money in the store. The move cut down some of the chat spam from bots. However, it also made TF2 nearly incomprehensible for any new player who downloaded it for free and had no idea what was going on, which is the exact kind of player the game needed to survive long term. The working solution, as far as it existed, was community servers. Servers run and moderated by players themselves, with their own anti-cheat rules. A popular TF2 creator called Uncle Dane maintained a network of servers called Uncletopia that were actually clean and playable, but these servers weren't visible to a new player who just clicked the play button on Steam. Those players landed on the official servers, got instantly killed by robots for several minutes, and then uninstalled. But the players weren't ready to give up, not yet. So on May 26, 2022, players organized a coordinated social media push behind the hashtag SaveTF2. The approach was deliberate, no harassment of Valve employees, no toxicity, just tens of thousands of people publicly sharing what the game meant to them and showing exactly what the official servers looked like. Screenshots of bot-filled lobbies, videos of aimbots killing players in the first second after spawn, stories from people who had spent years in the game and now couldn't log in without having their session immediately ruined. The hashtag trended worldwide, hitting number 2 on Twitter at its peak. The voice actor for the medic publicly supported it. Even a popular Animal Crossing Twitter account showed up to help. The noise was impossible to ignore. And then, for the first time in almost 2 years, the official Team Fortress 2 Twitter account posted something. TF2 community, we hear you. We love this game and know you do too. We see how large this issue has become and are working to improve things. The community celebrated. Valve had acknowledged it. Things were going to change. Valve issued a wave of VAC bans later that summer. They adjusted the vote kick system. The bots became less constant for a while, and people had hope once again. However, they came back. By the end of 2023, they were just as bad as before. In some regions, even worse. So in June of 2024, the community did it again. This time, the hashtag was FixTF2. This time, the approach had a second prong, a petition that over 200,000 people signed and directly emailed to Valve. Over 20,000 negative Steam reviews poured in over the course of a few days, dropping TF2's recent review rating to mostly negative for the first time in its 17-year history, then to overwhelmingly negative. However, Valve did not post anything this time. The frustrating part is that Valve was not completely ignoring TF2 during all of this. Through 2022 and 2023, they pushed actual gameplay updates with new community-made maps and game modes, the first new content since Jungle Inferno 5 years earlier. The bot situation, while never resolved, was measurably less severe on most servers than at its worst point in 2020 and 2021. But the communication remained almost non-existent. No roadmap, no developer blog. The one tweet in 2022 had been the entire public-facing acknowledgement of 5 years of community concern. The approach from Valve seemed to be, keep the lights on, keep the microtransaction revenue coming in, and let the community handle the rest. And the community, in full honesty, had been doing exactly that for years. Tournament leagues, RGL in North America, ETF2L in Europe, OzFortress in Australia, ran full competitive seasons with actual prize pools. Fan animators kept releasing short films. Content creators kept making videos. The game's culture was being sustained entirely by people who simply refused to let it go. Then, in February of 2025, Valve did something that almost nobody predicted. February 18th, 2025, Valve posted on the Team Fortress website. The title was, "The TF2 SDK has arrived." They had released the full client and server source code for Team Fortress 2 to the public, the actual code the game runs on. 18 years of development handed to the community to do with as they want. The only condition, anything made with it has to be free. Within months, community developers had taken that code, fixed bugs that had been sitting on the community's wishlist for years, and submitted them back to Valve as pull requests. Valve bundled those fixes into an official update. The community was now, in a concrete and verifiable sense, the development team maintaining its own game, and reactions split down the middle almost immediately. Half the community treated this as an enormous gift. This was like what happened with Gary's Mod and Half-Life 2, a beloved engine handed to creative people and the results going in directions nobody could predict. Within weeks, a fully standalone TF2 mod called TF2 Classified launched on Steam and drew thousands of players in the first days. The other half of the community looked at the same news and saw a studio quietly backing out the door. The reasoning was simple. You don't hand your game's source code to the public because you have big plans for it. You do it because you've decided you're finished. Robin Walker is still listed at Valve. The man who skipped class in Melbourne in 1996 to make a Quake mod, who got hired on the spot and spent the next 3 decades building and rebuilding the thing, is still there. In one interview he mentioned, in passing, that someday he'd like to make Team Fortress 3. He also said he couldn't guarantee he'd stay on TF2 forever. And there's something about Team Fortress 2 that keeps people coming back that is hard to fully put into words. It's not that it's the best looking shooter, or the most mechanically tight, or the most balanced even. It's that it has characters. Real, dumb, genuinely lovable characters with voices and personalities and histories, in a genre where the player is usually just guy with gun. The heavy loves his minigun and calls her Sasha. The soldier was rejected from every military in the world and still absolutely considers himself a war hero. The engineer builds a sentry gun, upgrades it, watches over it, and when it gets destroyed, there's a voice line in the game where he says goodbye to it. Nobody writes a goodbye line for a robot turret unless they actually care. Robin Walker, John Cook, and the team they built at Valve cared. And when Valve stopped caring enough, the community cared enough to carry it themselves. Through the bot years, through the silence, through the uncertainty about what the SDK release actually means for the game's future. The mod 3 people built in their spare time in Australia, that Valve spent 9 years rebuilding from scratch 3 separate times, that survived development hell and a corporate communication blackout and an infestation of actual robots, is still going. Somewhere right now, a spy is failing to backstab someone. A Demoman just launched himself into the sky. Some games just don't quit.